Welcome to the second season of Ventures and Visionaries, episode 3, To Your Health. This podcast is about vision, entrepreneurship, or in other words, business and innovation, and I'm your host, Mordy, Hackel. Welcome to the show. I am so excited for our discussion today. Our guest is Dr. Alex Cahana, a deep thinker, a Web 3.0 investor who began his professional journey as a medical doctor specializing in pain management. Dr. Cahana's experience is broad and deep. For those who don't believe me, just take a look at some of his LinkedIn posts. It's definitely going to inspire some thought. I'm super excited to learn more and very interested in hearing about what Dr. Alex Cahana has to say today. And welcome, Dr. Cahana. How are you?
Good. Thank you, Morty. And please call me Alex. If you call me Dr. Cahana, I don't know if it's grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, or my sister. So Alex is perfect. And it's a pleasure to be
There's
here.
more doctors in your family than I can count. So Alex, it is.
Great. And thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation as well.
Good. I am as well. Thank you so much. And maybe we could start a little bit with, your background. I think it started with medicine and then moved into business, finance, and investing, or was it always that way?
Well, I started in pain medicine. At the time, it was not as robust as it is nowadays. And throughout my almost 30 years of clinical medical career, I've opened 6 pain centers around the world. So not only do I speak many languages, but I'm familiar with healthcare in different countries, and I can speak to the global healthcare system. As a pain doctor, I've been involved in, of course, the opioid crisis, which that within itself has a lot of, I want to say, medical and socioeconomic implications, and was always interested in technology integration in a clinical workflow to see how that, helps with the patient-physician dialogue. And this is at a time where we didn't have concepts like today, the quantified self and biohacking and all these things. And I realized at that time that you cannot seriously talk about mental health and physical health without talking about financial health. And so I started to understand first as what we call in medicine social determinants of health and how that financial health impacts the individual, but then afterwards in kind of like a systemic approach of ecosystems and how can healthcare, not only in the US, but all over the world, can sustain itself in terms of payment systems and so forth. So I have this kind of combination of, I want to say, medical scientific literacy, digital literacy, and financial literacy.
I think that's an incredibly rare combination, but it certainly gives you a broad base from which to look. Over the last, let's say, couple of years, have there been any insights that have come from all 3 of these areas that perhaps just completely are mind-blowing for those of us who are more laymen's?
Yeah, I think that one thing that I could see around the world is that the healthcare system doesn't work in most of the countries in the world. We can talk about a few that I think work a little bit better, but I'll be pressed to talk about a system where the population or the public as such says healthcare is great here. And it doesn't matter if it's a single payer or fully private or whatever mix we have. There's always this present of I don't like healthcare, but I love my doctor. So there's kind of like dissociation between the personal experience and the trust that is the, I want to say, nucleus of this therapeutic dyad. But I would say that after COVID, I think that there was an erosion of trust, so much so that we have difficulty in figuring out how to work together. And this really was the game changer. This is not only about a question of cost or some type of magic technology in terms of a drug or a vaccine or some type of electronic health record, but the difference between interoperability and intercooperability. And I always want to say that there was a healthcare before the pandemic and then healthcare after the pandemic. And of course, it's very different in, I want to say, high income countries, which benefited from, warp speed and vaccines and treatments, versus those who are on the other side who to date did not benefit from the scientific developments that came with the pandemic. So I think that it is that realization that not only are things not working, but we're having trouble working with each other, that really pushed me to say, okay, so let's figure out all kinds of methods or all kinds of solutions that would augment this interoperability that I hope we'll be able to cover.
Today's show is sponsored in part by PAX 8. Technology is evolving, and PAX 8 is here to help you stay at the forefront of change. Using the power of data and AI, MSPs can take advantage of what the future holds. PAX 8 lives at the intersection of community, education, and marketplace innovation. And whatever your goal is will get you there. Get started at pax8.com. That's PAX number 8.com. Yeah, and I'm very much looking forward to speaking about that as well. And from a medical side, it sounds like we're slowly moving into, at least I can't speak for other countries. In the United States, it sounds like there's a lot of conglomerates that are running the medical care, and the decision making sometimes is good for the patient, sometimes is not. And at least from my own experience, having to deal with it, it's been difficult to corral the multiple people who need to engage in care, particularly when somebody has multiple issues.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's a great observation. I think that what is unique, I want to say, in affluent systems, countries that suffer from affluence, it's very different than when you
Suffer
don't
from
have
affluence. I
access to
like that.
anything. But yeah, but when you have everything at your fingertips and you want it now, I think that one of the things that needs to be addressed in the healthcare system, we'll talk for the sake of our conversation in the United States. In Europe, it would be more or less the same. It's a little bit different in Japan and Singapore and in Australia and New Zealand. But if we speak to the U.S., it's how can we uh, um, negotiate this tension between we know that it's good to be healthy in a system where being sick is the business. Is that every time when I would see a pain patient and I would, let's say, treat them in 45 minutes instead of 5 visits, I would have my CFO look at me and say, you just kissed goodbye $500,000 worth of income. So this idea of cash flow, where there's a test for every pest and a pill for every ill, where being healthy is a bad business, it's bad for business. And this divorce between the mission and how we're getting paid is really the crux, or the, I want to say, nexus of all the problems. And I think that we're able to solve this, and we can talk a little bit about what decentralization brings in and what tokenization brings in. But really, what is the long and short of it is that as long as the system pays us to keep people sick enough, then we're not going to see, social thriving, and we're not going to see health. And this is why life expectancy in the US has been declining these last 10 to 15 years.
It's interesting. Perhaps that in itself is an own limitation of capitalism, because, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think that it has to do with capitalism as such, but more as what do we pay for? I'm not against for profits. Not against incentives to encourage people to do their best. Where the problem is, what are the incentives to do it? And so, if we're able to align those incentives, that's where it starts to become interesting. And this brings into the question of value. And it is true that in a capitalist system, value, usually is thought of equals Q divided by C, quality divided by cost. Now, the problem with that equation is, one is quality is not the same for everyone. So let's say $1 million pill is high quality for a pharma company, but for a medical director of a health system, paying one patient $1 million pill is low quality. So that's one issue. And the second is that when you put cost in the denominator, then what you're implying is that we need to do more with less because, you get more bang for your buck. And that equation always thinks in a mode of scarcity, that we have to do more with less and less. And that is what's not sustainable in the system because there's only so much you can do with so much equipment and manpower and work hours. It's almost like the story of the farmer who had a mule and the mule died. And he said, it's such a shame because last week I taught him how to work without water and food. So, how much can you lower cost?
That's terrible.
But what I would suggest, and I hope this answers your question, is to reevaluate the value equation. And the way I would do it, and this is the mind shift that needs to happen within the system, is that the fact that in the denominator, we could put what you're willing to give divided by what you're wanting to get. So the fact that you have what you want to get in the denominator is really not important. Like, I want everything for free. I want to be healthy without trying to be healthy. I want a magic pill for it. It doesn't matter how small or how big that number is. But in the enumerator, the question is, what are you willing to give? And so a patient that's not willing to give a healthy lifestyle, the value prop is not big.
Same.
A government that's not giving infrastructure, it's not, value prop. A industry that's not willing to give affordable treatments, not a big. So I think that this really forces us, this type of equation, to understand that if we do not really try a bit harder to stay healthy, then there's no reason why we would be healthy.
Interesting. And would this value equation change whether or not the medicine system was socialized or third-party pay or something else entirely?
So you know me, I'm a decentralist. I am very, anybody who reads my posts know that I'm very suspicious of when there is a concentration of power. So big government and big sick funds and big payers and this oligopoly, of power, simply because it's at odds with free market. That is actually at odds with capitalism, if anything. So, but again, if I take aside my bias, then I would say that the way for a sustainable healthcare system while maintaining the principles of a free and open market is to involve the patients or the users, if you wish, in the economic activity of the system. So right now, healthcare is a $5 trillion business, which is expected to be $8 trillion by 2030. So it is beyond now. It's starting to touch the 20% GDP. We know that healthcare is the largest employer in the country. So any place that a hospital, a rural hospital, or a safety net hospital closes, it's not only that people don't have access to medical care, they're losing their primary employer in the system. I think only in Alabama, out of the 50 states, only Alabama, the healthcare is second after Walmart. But the rest is, the healthcare system is the largest. Even in New York State, it's going to be New York Presbyterian. It's the largest employer, in the state. So what has happened right now is that if we look at the various stakeholders, patients and users are not part of that economic activity. And so it's almost like they have no skin in the game. They have no true incentive to be better.
Right.
And so I'm not, instead of saying, the insurance companies shouldn't make so much money, or drug companies shouldn't make so much money, or the savings, we can talk about that, the waste, everybody's, onto that. But what nobody's talking about is, how can I, as a citizen, in a world with AI, that I can be a citizen scientist, I can be a citizen researcher. We now do things that we are totally autonomous. Just to give you an example so the listeners will know what I'm talking about. Both of us, we're old enough to remember that when we would want to travel, we would use a travel agent. Now, it's not because we were rich. It's because the travel agent, the travel agent was the only one who had that data, right? that
Yeah.
could allow me to fly. Now, I, for 15 years, thought that she was getting me the best deals until suddenly I realized that she's giving me always the worst deals. Now, it wasn't because she was a bad person, but because she was paid commission. So her job actually was to give me the most expensive ticket.
That's funny.
And so it wasn't because she was a capitalist or a bad person. Her incentive was misaligned with mine.
Right.
And so with the democratization of data, now information is now online, so we can Google it. I don't know, Skyscanner, whatever it should. I remember when it started was Orbits or whatever that was called at the time. So nobody thinks that it's weird to be your own travel agent, or to be your own insurance agent, or to be your own broker, or to be your own banker, or to be your own currency emitter. We can go forward and be our own doctors. So this idea that in an age of blockchain, Web3, AI, we have the tools to what we call in the work that I do, the bank of me. Bank of me. And both of us can be the bank of us. And the community can be the bank of the community. But the point is, we can actually be able to manage our health and our wealth. And this is really the transformation that needs to happen to move from being passive health services consumers to health and wealth producers. And so it's not
Perhaps.
about socialism or capitalism. It's about how do we give these tools, which I would call tokens, for people to participate in the economic activity of healthcare.
Interesting. And I wonder if that's not just healthcare, meaning I'm in the middle of reading a book on the lost, I forget exactly the name of it, Lost Focus, which talks about, the incentives of big data and big technology companies to capture my attention and keep me focused on, let's call it the social media du jour, for lack of a better term, because they're incented for me to spend 15, 20 minutes on Instagram or whatever tool that is rather than others. A similar idea.
It is clear that we live now in a, if you wish, cognitive overload where we have just a lot. Again, going back to affluenza, we have 50 types of yellow cheese when you go down to the market. So like, how many yellow cheeses do you need? But beyond the cognitive overload and beyond the ability to sift between what is true and not true, or what is useful and not useful, is the basic idea that your data is like money. And I'm not talking about monetization of the data. I'm talking about like money. In other words, it's yours. You want to keep it in a secure wallet. You want to use it whenever, wherever, for whatever reason, without asking anybody permission. You believe that that data has value, and you want to invest in it and in its quality so its value will accrue. And at the end, you'll decide, do I want to donate it to my nears and dears? Do I want to donate it to science? Or do I want to, leave it for others? So I think that if we look at data as an asset, then suddenly all the, I want to say, products that exist in the capital world become relevant, that you can just replace the word dollar with data, and it would be the same. But we're not used to thinking this way. And we just say, okay, in healthcare, I can't access my healthcare records, or it's not mine, and that's what's wrong. So if I would, when I would go sometimes to the Hill, and they would say to me, okay, Dr. Cahana, give me just one thing that you would change if you would have them. What do we need to legislate? I would say self-sovereign data. That data is mine. Now, this is not just a question of money and financial power and financial freedom, if you wish, but it's also basic fairness. Because if you think about it, Mordy, for a second, you are your actions. And those actions are captured by data. So if some third party uses it, loses it, or abuses it without your permission, they're taking a piece of you. So look at 23andMe. They took my genetic data On page 147 in font 3, they said, well, we can do with it whatever we want, but you signed it, you consented, so it's a tough break. And now they got bankrupt. They're selling it to someone who will take care of it and be our stewards. I don't want anybody to take care of my data. I am the steward of my data. I am supposed to give to whoever I want that data under the conditions that I want, with, I want to say, the benefits that I deserve from that quality of data. That's what needs to change.
Alex, would you say that this is as a large quantum shift as when the economy switched from barter to money as a concept? And then we went from, money being a physical material to a paper or digital currency, and now potentially something else.
100%. And I'll tell you when it started. It didn't start when AI started to come up into the collective consciousness. It didn't start when Bitcoin came after the financial meltdown. It didn't start in the financial meltdown. It didn't even start in, I would say, financial deregulation in the 80s. It started in 1970, I think it was 1 or 3, where we left the gold standard.
Yeah.
That's it. And so the minute we invented colored paper money with pictures of kings, queens, slave owners, and colonizers, not just in the US, but all over the world, that it is backed by our imagination instead of real assets. Okay, what we basically said is, you got to trust me.
Yeah.
And that is this erosion of trust that took 50 years and really kind of popped after COVID.
Yeah.
And said, look, I would really like to trust you, but I can't. So I have to go to my echo chambers. That's who I trust. I don't trust the other team. I trust what's happening here in my country, but I don't trust the other countries. So we have lost that ability.
It doesn't allow us to have discourse and dialogue and the pollination of ideas from an opposing point of view, which I think is a horrible thing. I don't know. I mean, maybe you agree or disagree.
I would say like this. I like to, instead of state the problems, try to find solutions. And so I remember a conversation that I had in Ivory Coast. I was part of a Silicon Valley delegation, sitting next to the president of Ivory Coast. And, I was speaking because I speak fluent French. He was speaking French, and so I saw he was getting bored. So I said, I got to ask him a question before he says, okay, this is done. And I said, can I ask you a question? Sure. He says, what is on the average Ivorian's mind? And he said, money. And I said, why? He said, because if you have a lot of it, you can do whatever you want. And if you don't have it, you can't do anything. I said, that's interesting, because I went the other day to your 5-star hotel and asked for a room. I said $100. So I put a $100 bill on the reception desk and went up to the room. In the meantime, the front desk guy, the receptionist, he ran to the pharmacist and said, here's the money that I owe you. The pharmacist says, thanks for paying. He went to the butcher and said, here's the money that I owe you. He went to the lady that he met the night before at the bar. She ran back to the hotel and said, here's the money that I owe you. In the meantime, I came down from the room and said, I'm not interested in the room. I took the $100 and I left. So what just happened? There's no GDP. There was no production. There was no consumption. There was no, but that piece of colored paper money liberated 4 Ivorians from debt. How'd that happen? So if you start to understand that this is all but a game, then suddenly you understand that we just have to change the game. We just have to change the rules, the incentives of the game. Do we want to incentivize work and labor? Or do we want to incentivize not working? Do we want to incentivize acts of kindness and wisdom and love and gifting? Or do we want everything to be transactional and not interactional? So that is why I'm working all over the world in different countries and different communities, creating local currencies to decrease their dependence on the sovereign currency, because it is just a piece of paper. And also, even in a country like Bhutan, that is a tiny country of 800,000 people between China and India. Like, it couldn't have been a smaller between these two oceans. That they are, for them, faith-based activity is very valuable. So that is why they develop what's called the global national happiness, gross national happiness, sorry. So instead of GDP, they have GNH, gross national happiness, with indicators saying we recognize the value of what in our system is called non-tangibles. And so, like in this case, okay, I'm not getting paid for this, podcast. You're not getting paid for making this We're all doing it from goodwill. But imagine that we would have received a token of appreciation. That is a currency that runs between us. We could say, we're nice people because Alex always comes and talks in earnest and is, enlightening and inspiring. And Mordy always, brings great people to his podcast to continue and engage in his community. So there are ways, and this is what tokenization is. When people say, "Oh, tokens, I don't know, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, I don't understand what that is." Tokenization is the process of converting anything of value. It could be money, it could be a deed, it could be a contract, it could be a poem, it could be a prayer, it could be meditation, it could be anything you want that you think is of value, converted into a digital format. That's all what it is.
And then it becomes in itself a store of value.
Exactly. And each market would have different values. And so now I'm sure that among people who are listening, says, "Oh, I have here an arbitrage, opportunity. I can buy like tomatoes at 4 cents in here and sell it at 6 cents over there." No. We create these local currencies to avoid these artificial price pressures that only penalize those who want to go long. And again, it comes back to, I am not against making profit. I don't want anybody to leave this conversation to think, that I'm a post-Marxist. I don't know what. I love capital and capitalism. But what we have now are not open and free markets because we are mixing. If I want to use the word tokens, in currencies, we are mixing different type of velocities of the movement of these currencies because there are different types of intentions. There are people who say, "I want to hold on to this currency because I believe in it and I will hold it on forever, or I'll hold it on for the next 20 years." Because others say, "No, I'm just buying it today and I want to sell it tomorrow at a profit," which is fine too, but don't put them in the same pot. And it just reminds me of a story that I told. Again, I apologize for going back to Africa, but I was in the Masai Mara, in the border between Tanzania and Kenya. And I was asking my buddy, Joab, I said, "Joab, why are the lions, why are the big cats so skinny?" And he said, I said, "Are they on Ozempic or something?" He said, "No, they're skinny because of the rain. There's too much rain, so the grass is too high." I said, "Oh my God, so what's happening?" He says, "Yeah, he can't see the impalas, so they're getting all hungry. The hyenas are starting to injure them. And at the end, they also eat them." I said, "Oh my God, then what will happen if there won't be any lions?" He said, "Well, then there'll be too many impalas. They'll eat all the grass. They'll be exposed. They'll get skinny, and the hyenas will eat them." I said, "Oh my God, so no impalas and no lions?" He said, "Yeah. So what will happen? Just hyenas?" He said, "Well, then they'll just eat each other." And I looked at him and said, "You just described New York City." So we need to create a balanced ecosystem where there is room for everyone to thrive. And this is really what we're talking about. And it's not about socialism or capitalism or single payer or multiple payers. It is the opportunity for everybody to participate in the economic activity that at the same starting point and the same conditions that everybody has. It appeals to the simple, very American value of fairness. Just be fair. That's it.
And it appeals to the very American idea that the quote unquote rugged individual, for lack of better term, has their own control over their own stuff for lack again of better term, and has the ability to take that and either monetize it or, as you said, gift it or donate it or do whatever it is with it. I was talking to a client of mine who mentioned that, and again, this is about data and the creation of data and perhaps too narrow of a scope, but the idea that a self-driving vehicle is going to create on an order of magnitude somewhere between 10 to 100 times the amount of data that a human being creates in a day is incredibly fascinating. And what happens with all of that, and who owns all of that, and where does all that information that theoretically is owned by the driver, not the driver, the owner of the car, not the car, what happens with all this information? Is it owned by society? How do we start thinking about these things? And I'm so glad that you're bringing up these questions. They matter a lot.
I'll give you my take out of it. It might be a little bit different than what you usually hear from other people or read, on media. Just like I love dollars and I love data, I love technology. So, in regard to AI and this kind of like post-labor economics and this singularity where we're all going to lose a job and we'll all need a universal basic income and an allowance from the big brother to get, I say like this. I am now, I have on me technology. Okay. It's this. This is technology. Okay? Like this, I don't see you. Like this, I see you. So I don't have an adversarial relationship with my glasses. They're part of me. And to the point that I don't feel them. I only feel them when I don't. So just like now I don't see you and I see you and I see better, AI will allow you eventually to think better. And so I do believe in the machine human dyad. And I always say, and I was giving a talk in London at the Royal Society. It was like a really nice, fancy talk. Royal Society is near the Buckingham Palace. I was at the podium where Isaac Newton spoke, and all this. I was like talking about crypto, and everybody was like AI, and I'm the only crypto guy there. But anyway, I'm sitting there and I'm saying, I am not speaking as an expert in artificial intelligence. I am speaking as an expert in natural stupidity. That I am not worried about the machines being too smart. I am worried about people being too stupid. And that's really where the message here is that we have to continue the effort to augment our digital literacy. That we cannot move in life without understanding what the internet is. And not understanding that blockchain is basically a better version of the internet. Not know that Web 1, the original internet, is one that you can read. That Web 2, which is currently what we're doing and using now, is to read and write, right? Because we can upload this. And Web 3 will be read, write, and own, which means that we also own a piece of it. So right now we're talking through Riverside on a desktop that is now belongs to Apple, in an internet that is going through AT&T. Like all these people that have choke points that they own anything, and I'm not participating in that economic activity. And if I am, I'm getting pennies. I'm the one that's generating all the valuable information, and I'm getting close to nothing in return. So this is what has to change, that we have to claim our true value. But if we don't understand how things work, if we don't interest ourselves in how things, if we just say, well, that's how it used to be all the time, then we cannot be surprised that things are going to happen and we're going to be behind the curve. And so I think that it's very propos that we're talking about this. Tomorrow is July 4th. So it's like the 4th of July. We're kind of like, this is really, what is it to be American? What are we, what is the mission here? What are we aspiring to? And I think that a conversation of leading the digital world, leading the world economy, leading, the I want to say next phase of where this planet is going to, it's very important for the participants in our society to be active into making things better.
It's really interesting that you say that, because my question to you is going to be exactly in the opposite direction. Because, I've read a while back that say implementing wireless technology in certain third world countries was a lot quicker to implement telecom or telephony there, because they didn't have to deal with the sunk cost of all the wires that were put in, and they could just leapfrog a generation or two or three and just go straight into putting up cell towers. Use that as the springboard example. Would that mean that the United States, with its economic structure and assumptions and people who are built into the success of this system, would it be easier to do this in a smaller, less developed economically country? Or no, it has to be from a place of strength?
I think that's I think that that's an excellent question, and I think that I'm answering you now differently than I would have answered before I got involved or introduced into the world of blockchain and decentralization about 12 years ago. So I'm one of the early adopters of all this. And the reason is that because of the complexity of the world, because of the enormity of the data, the weight of the data, the energetic requirements of all this data, all that, to think that you can own everything is just too hard. And this is why I'm talking about intercooperability, that the days where we could do end to end and bring everything together changed since the Industrial Revolution, where we're starting, they always give the example of the pencil, how hard it is to build a pencil because you have, the wood and the lead and the eraser and all this, and not to speak about a car or a jet or, a SpaceX and all that. So I think that what makes the US strong, in my opinion, is not its size. It is its curiosity and openness to innovation. Is that when and I know because I lived in other countries where, you can't speak until spoken to, because you're too young to come up with an idea.
Mm.
And so without naming these countries and without, shaming other areas in the world, I'm speaking to the strengths of the US. And that is that if the idea is good, it doesn't matter where it came from. Now, where we're starting to fail is this idea of shared prosperity. And this is where countries that are smaller than the US and that are younger than the US and that their economies are considered low to middle income, or are starting to get an advantage, not only because they are more nimble, but because they understand that none of us is as good as all of us.
Mm.
That is really what's important. That this idea of abundance, what is happening to the economy is not only that it's digital, we are moving to an abundance economy because data is infinite. So as opposed to economy that is based on extraction of things from earth, minerals, oil, gas, you name it, instead of basing all our value on our ability to extract from people, from things, from the land, but actually force multiply it by abundance.
Wow.
That's the change in the mentality that needs to happen. And the way I say it very simply is that we now live in a world where we love things and use people. And we need to go back to the world of where we love people and use things. And that's where we can succeed. If we will continue to love each other with abundance, that I, for example, am sharing my knowledge. I'm trying to do the best I can, because who knows is listening to this? A kid who is now 19 years old and said, I got to work on the next Nobel Prize. And I don't need to know that it was thanks to this conversation that made it. Doesn't matter, because it contributes to the comments. So all our economic activity, because at the end of the day, we're talking about money, needs to go into the investment into the commons. And why? And this we see in the United States, the falling apart of our infrastructure. And anybody who lives in New York knows it takes only one person in a car, in a subway, to disrupt everybody's ride. And so we need to start to be more loving to each other. We need, and this again ties into data. And I'll maybe connect all this, if you wish, into healthcare, because we started with pain medicine, right? So I remember that I was invited once to the Hill to talk about opioid epidemic. And I think it was Senator Grassley at the time said, "Can you tell me what the problem is?" And I asked them, like, how long do you want me to give? 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 90, this is 90 seconds. I said, I can tell you in 30 seconds. He says, okay. I asked him, what is the opposite of health? He said, the opposite of health is sickness. I said, no, the opposite of health is isolation. That through sickness and illness, you become isolated. And so if you believe that the opposite of health is isolation, then the journey back to well-being is connectedness. Connectedness to yourself, to your family, to your friends, to your faith, to your data. That's really what it is, that we need to be connected.
And that's how we protect the most vulnerable.
Exactly.
Because we try to do, we as a society, I'm not speaking for myself, but like we as a society try all kinds of things, anything from government programs to, not-for-profits and such. But it's almost like we're willing to give the economic output that we've received rather than engage in the self contribution and the reconnecting.
It is true. It is true. And again, this provokes a lot of thoughts, or different thoughts for different people. The way I like to think of it, because of my military background, is you're only as strong as your weakest link. So, the more you let people drown, the harder it is to swim. Now, this does not mean that I don't believe in meritocracy. This does not mean that, as someone who is in science and understands that, there's no equality between animals, right? The flowers don't look to be the same. There's no wealth distribution or redistribution among different actors in nature, but nature is balanced because he's working in an ecosystem. Like the story of the hyenas. If we're all just hyenas, it doesn't work. And so I think that, again, going back to everything, so the listeners here and your audience can kind of feel how this is all connecting. This is not complicated stuff. Is that we need, in this world where there is cognitive overload, where we are suffering from misinformation and lost our ability to trust each other, is to understand the basic technology that is out there that can reinstitute trust. What are the technologies that I have to know about? 2 technologies. You don't have to be a computer scientist to understand them. One is AI, which I think most people are interested in some level or another, saying it's a really smarter way to make searches and deep research, and it helps me think better, but I have to be careful and blah, blah, blah. And the second one that people don't know, or don't know enough, or don't know the right things, is blockchain. And the way I explain blockchain, which is basically that's just a block of data connected in a chain, which means that it's encrypted and tamper-proof and secure and private, is that it is simply the software that solves the social problem of trust. If you say this was blockchained, it means you can trust it. So if you're reading a piece of paper that says under it, it's on a blockchain, it's true. If it's not, if it's owned by the New York Times, I got to trust New York Times. Mm-hmm. And so that's what people need to kind of just be interested in, these technologies that give them the tools to live in this new digital world that has its own digital economy, that has its own digital requirements. Why? Because if you won't, you'll be isolated,
Hmm.
you'll be disconnected, and you will not be well. And this is the malaise that we feel. People saying things are changing and I don't know what the hell's going on.
So the solution there is go find a friend, have a drink, out, talk, reconnect, find your friends, find your family, find your faith. Be more mindful and celebrate the greatness of the United States of America and those crazy lunatic people who decided to take on King George all those years ago. Because, like, that was, I mean, to think just how committed they had to have been to this idea. Literally, they were staking their lives on this.
Yep. And love people and use things and not the other way around.
Alex,
That's the
just
most important thing.
are there, I mean, you're obviously involved in so many different things. Is there any passion projects that you'd like to speak about?
I would say yes. There are many, too many. Maybe we'll need a separate call,
Okay.
but I do want to mention two that are I want to say provocative and praiseworthy. One is I want to say in healthcare, in Web3 healthcare, uh, where we are actually working with the current administration, where everybody, everybody says, "What do you think of the current administration?" So the way I answer it, without divulging my political, thoughts, is to say, uh, it ain't as bad as they said it would be, but it ain't as good as they were promised.
Okay.
Okay, so let's kind of like, there is a recognition that things need to be done differently. And so I've been working with the last three administrations on trying to build a decentralized healthcare system, especially to help rural America.
Okay.
And so, because those are the vulnerable that you're speaking to, those are the ones that nobody looks at, thinks about, nobody cares. And so, right now, we're in the midst of building a system that has in it clinical therapies, a digital stack or a tech stack, and if you wish, payment slash insurance system that is very different than what we're used to. That I hope that if it'll prove to be as robust as we think it will be in the next 18 to 24 months, it can serve as a model to be replicated in other places that need help. In other words, we're not talking about taking away the successes in medicine. There are great hospitals here in New York City, in big cities, in small towns. This is not about taking anybody's, well hard earned work away. This is about those who are considered medical and economic failures for the system. Note that I'm talking about both. Both medically, they're not getting better, but also financially, because you can't squeeze more money out of them. So even if you're like kind of like, I don't care if they're sick or not, as long as I can get money out of it, I could care less. Even that, they're not good.
Huh.
So we are taking the worst of the worst that everybody is passing as a bad penny. That I remember as a doctor, I would dread to see them Friday afternoon because I know that they would ruin my weekend.
Hmm.
So that is one project that I hope that next year when I come again, we can talk about that and see results.
That'd be amazing.
And the second one is in a faraway country called Bhutan, which, like I mentioned, has their gross national happiness index that we are tokenizing. So as a reminder, we are converting all these intangible things of value that they see, the real world interactions, into real world assets.
Mhm.
So how does that look like? So for example, anybody who visited in Asia, know that there are people standing in front of a temple. Usually they're elderly, and they greet you, and you walk into the temple. Okay, so we just have a QR code, and they scan, and they get faith tokens, right? They get faith tokens, and at the end of the day, they take those faith tokens and they go down the hill to the restaurant, and with those faith tokens, they get a bowl of rice for free. And the gentleman who owns the restaurant scans it, and it goes on a ledger. And that is considered an offering that he would have given anyway to the temple. And so when he says, I'm a good person, they look at his ledger and they say, yeah, you are, because you gave it to 1,000 people this month. You support the temple. And so suddenly the farmer who sells to the restaurateur will sell him at a discount and have this economic, because he's a good person who has a good credit. And the bank will give him a credit score because these are good people and reliable people. And you create an economy of electronic bartering that does not require this paper money.
That's funny. Electronic bartering. So we're literally coming back full circle. And instead of switching the bartering and the lubrication mechanism being gold, which then became dollars backed by gold, which then got decoupled from gold, which then became the blockchain, and everyone thought it was going to be Bitcoin and people would buy coffee with Bitcoin. No, really what we're doing is we're going back to bartering, but the mechanism is the level of trust. And I now have the ability to create the economic value myself through my activities and my gross happiness tokens and my good person tokens and the ability to just, change the world with my beingness and participatingness.
Yep. And again, I came back from the Gulf, from the UAE. And everybody's the rage now doing gold backed tokens, and sure. And so I'm sitting there in front of a couple of, I would say, well important people, let's put it this way, well off. And they're talking to me about the need to tokenize gold and create these gold backed assets. And sure. I said, let me just get this straight. Okay. Let me just get this straight. What we're doing is we are making a hole in the ground, right, to pull out gold, to clean it and refine it, then fly it into another country, right, usually Switzerland, to then put it in a different hole in the ground, covered, and have people around it and pay those people around it to keep it in that hole in the ground. And that all that energetic expense is to do what? We're not talking about gold that we're using because we need to put it in some type of medical machine that requires. We're not even talking about gold to make leaves of gold to put on caviar to eat. No, we're talking about making a hole in the ground to take a precious metal, to put in a different hole in the ground, to put people to protect.
To guard.
That's the business.
It's
that is why I am not worried by artificial intelligence, but worried by natural stupidity. Mm-hmm. It is stupid.
Alex,
there's no other word to use.
I can't even begin to tell you how much longer we can go on this. This is wonderful. And I certainly hope that your observations and the inherent optimism that you bring, even though we are able to call out our flaws for what they are, the inherent optimism can truly build real insight and success for the people who listen to the program and to everybody in the world, because that at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about here.
Well, I appreciate your questions, and I appreciate the platform and the opportunity to share with you some of my thoughts. And, thank you for what you're doing. And I wish us all a very happy 4th of July.
Thank you. Thank you for my guest today, Dr. Alex Cahana. As a final word for our listeners, if people are looking to connect with you, is LinkedIn the best way to do that?
Yes.
Okay, so look up Dr. Alex Cahana with a C, as seen on the screen, and you will find his posts on LinkedIn. And again, Dr. Cahana, thank you so much. Alex, I appreciate you being here. Just one last word. Ventures and Visionaries is grateful to be sponsored by KJ Technology. KJ Technology is a unique business because it enables business function. Their technology advisory, cybersecurity, and proactive processes are designed to solve your real world challenges. For a complimentary consultation, please email info@kjtechnology.com or call 646-556-6500. Thank you, everybody. Happy 4th.